looking, throwing in the end zone.
Montana, touchdown, John Taylor.
Young to the air, Young to Jerry Rice, touchdown San Francisco.
Young stumbles on the way back and fires up the middle. Pass is caught by Owens.
Hello and welcome to the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers discussion and analysis, plus timely and entertaining sports and pop culture topics. And today we're going to be discussing the 49ers 53-man roster. I know there was a lot of discussion and head scratching when the initial roster was released, but I decided to hold off on a podcast until the dust settled, which it has. So I do have some thoughts on the 53 that made it, players that are cut, players that were released, where they ended up, and the 16-man practice squad. Initially, a lot of surprises, but I think where they settled out is a much more rational 53 than what we saw on Tuesday. There's no plus content this week. This is a roster reaction show. So like always, it starts with the Niners, but today it's going to end with the Niners as well. So let's get right into it.
Let's talk Niners.
So like I said in the open, Tuesday, cut down day, I think there was a lot of head scratching among 49er fans, confusion as to what the Niners were doing and why some players were cut from the roster, why there was only two tight ends in Kittle and Jake Tonges, why Ambry Thomas, of all players, was still on the roster with a broken arm. Meanwhile, he's someone that I wouldn't feel comfortable or confident that if I was cold, he could cover me with a blanket adequately. John Feliciano, we know that he needs surgery and that he might not be back till midseason, but they were still kind of dicking around there and wound up losing some players. And we're going to talk about that. Young players, albeit, but players that might have been able to contribute this year and down the line, especially given that they are rookies and on cheap contracts. But let's start with the quarterbacks, and I'll give you an interesting nugget of information as well. So all three quarterbacks were kept: Brock, Dobbs, and Brandon Allen. The number 2 quarterback spot still seems to be up in the air, but I will, at least as of this recording, but I will put my money on the Pastronaut, Josh Dobbs. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know that for the past 3 or 4 weeks, I've been pounding the table saying that the Niners should keep only 2 quarterbacks because the third emergency quarterback could be elevated off of the practice squad an unlimited number of times, would not count against the game day active roster, or would count against the game day active roster, not the 53, and would count as one of the 2 elevations, but you can do it as many times as you want. Turns out earlier this week, the NFLPA vetoed that league-wide rule, claiming that would be a way for teams to keep another quarterback on the practice squad and not have to pay them the commensurate amount of actually being on the active roster versus the practice squad, because as we know, there is a significant salary difference between the two. So news to me, as I was doing further research, apparently this was vetoed on July 11th. I did not know about that. I think a lot of people that were actually doing the reporting didn't know about that either when it was, use air quotes here, officially announced on Monday, the 26th of August, that this third QB rule in the practice squad was a no-go. So all 3 quarterbacks are on the 53, and I don't imagine that really changing throughout the season. Running backs. So couple surprises. There are 4 running backs, which is what I figured, but the 4 are a little bit different. It's McCaffrey, it's Jordan Mason, who has won the number 2 running back role. It is Patrick Taylor and Isaac Guerendo. So the surprise being that Eli Mitchell, who was, a favorite of Kyle Shanahan's, or is a favorite of Kyle Shanahan's, not necessarily battling for the number 2 role on the field with Jordan Mason since Mitchell has been out for all of preseason, had a hamstring strain, came back, injured, and again, and per Kyle Shanahan, it's severe enough to the point where doctors are recommending surgery. So not a candidate of IR to return. The other hamstring struck running back Isaac Guerendo came back as we saw in that Raider game, had a explosive 93-yard kickoff return, fared relatively well in terms of running back duties, nothing eye-popping off the charts, but was running hard into contact, and you obviously saw the speed on the kickoff return. Patrick Taylor, the free agent from the Packers, will be inactive on game days. Mason will be the backup to McCaffrey, and Isaac Guerendo will handle kick return duties. Tight ends. So yesterday on Tuesday, it was a head scratcher that it was just Kittle and Jake Tonjes. Both Cam Latu and Braden Willis were released. And I thought both young players would make it. I thought that, at least what Willis showed last year, Latu was hurt. Latu was getting involved in the passing game, couple receptions every game, but you did see upon rewatch how he was not fully understanding the offense, often getting himself covered up by a linebacker on a route or in a QB scramble, cutting the wrong way, not giving his quarterback an option. So Willis and Latu are gone. But just today and recently, Eric Saubert re-signed with the team. So a very different tight end room than the past 2 years. Kittle, Saubert, and Jake Tonjes. And good for Jake Tonjes, second-year player out of Cal. Made his presence felt in training camp and during the preseason games, getting on the stat sheet. Obviously showed more as a blocker than many of us thought he would have, being the lightest of really all 5 tight ends that we're discussing. So 3 tight ends to open the season. I had it at 4. I got 2 of them right with Kittle and Saubert, but Tonjes a surprise, and both young players being released a surprise. And, the Willis being released, seeing him line up at fullback in some preseason games, I thought he was more or less a lock as a backup to Kyle Juszczyk, and more on Willis in a few minutes. But clear that he needed to do some work blocking, not really a receiving threat at all. I guess the opposite could be said for Cam Latu, more of a receiving threat than a blocker, but not as much of a receiving threat as Kyle and company were hoping for. The good news with these cuts, even though they're young players, second-year players, is that San Francisco was willing to cut bait early. You saw it with Trey Lance after his second full year, cut in the offseason. You could tell as many Trey homers as there are out there, and a lot of the prominent YouTubers, 49er YouTubers that are out there are ardent Trey homers and still believe that Trey Lance has a future in this league, and he does, just as a backup quarterback. And I keep going back to, man, if some of these quote-unquote high-profile content creators or YouTubers got something that high-profile wrong, why the hell would any of us listen to anything else they got to say? It was a big swing and a miss, right? But the Niners and Trey Lance, as the preeminent example, are willing to cut bait early. They're not willing to throw good money or good years after bad. But then the flip side of that is bad drafting. And the third round has been awful to the 49ers in recent memory, where Cam Latu, gone. Trey Sermon, running back, gone. The next year, Ty Davis-Price is a third round running back pick, gone. Danny Gray, we're going to get to receivers, even though you know this already, he's gone, made zero impact. And a third round pick, even though he's still on the team, used on a kicker, Jake Moody, which I guess you have a better chance of sticking on this 49ers roster as a special teams player in the third round than you do as a skill position player, because all 4 of the previous ones are axed. Cam Latu was picked up by the Cleveland Browns, so he is employed, and we will get to Braden Willis in a few minutes. Let's transition to the offensive line. It's 10 with Trent Williams, and I am confident that his contract situation will be resolved by week 1, but let's just go over the players. Trent Williams, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, Dominic Puny, the rookie, and Colton McKivitz are your starters. Behind them, Jalen Moore, Nick Sakiel, Spencer Burford, and the recently released, but even more recently re-signed, Ben Barch. Jared Kingston, rookie 6th round pick, was released, picked up by the Carolina Panthers. And it goes to show that preseason stats really don't mean anything. If you've seen it on social media, there were stats floating around how Dominic Puny and Jared Kingston have both let up minimal to no pressures, and I forget the exact number for each one, on, however many snaps that they've played in the preseason. Jared Kingston was one of the more athletic guards drafted, and athleticism is obviously not everything. But my issue with the line currently is Jalen Moore is currently the only backup tackle, and he might be a starter week 1. And if that's the case, there is no backup tackle, and the 49ers have to figure out who their swing tackle could be. Yes, Nick Sakiel played some in college at Fordham. Yes, Spencer Burford, I guess, could play some. Yes, they could move Dominic Puny over if they really, really needed to. But I was surprised that the 49ers went with, at least in this iteration of the offensive line, one swing tackle. And I think I said 10 earlier. It's 9 total offensive linemen with Trent Williams. It would be 8 and all players active week 1 if Trent Williams doesn't play. Sorry about that. So backup tackle an issue, the fact that there's only one. 2, this is the same line as last year, and you're essentially swapping Dominic Puny for John Feliciano, who's on IR and, designated to return and could come back mid-season. But I feel like, and I think many people would agree with this, that this is a line that probably could have used a little bit more work. And by a little bit more work, I meant one new player. Let's not do anything ridiculously drastic. But for me, if Jared Kingston was comparable to Spencer Burford, and I know this is going to be Burford's 3rd year in the league, Kingston's a rookie. They both have guard tackle flexibility, but are more suited to playing guard. But if it's close, wouldn't you give it to the healthy player? Burford has, that broken hand, which in a couple weeks, may or may not need a wrap on it or whatnot, and is obviously has been cleared to practice, and I'm sure will be cleared for week 1 as well. But if it was close, I would think you would give it to the younger player, the cheaper player, who has an additional 2 years on their contract over Spencer Burford. Burford, especially since he was injured, he might have gone unclaimed. He might have been back to the practice squad. Now, that could have not happened, and maybe the Niners weren't willing to take that risk, but I hesitate to even use the word risk or gamble when it comes to someone like Spencer Burford, who could not, in his first 2 years, solidify himself as a rookie as a starting guard, when he was rotating at guard his rookie year with Daniel Brunskill, and the same with John Feliciano early in the season until Feliciano won the right guard spot, with about 2 months remaining. So I don't think Spencer Burford is any great shakes, and I'm not one of those, pulling for the rookie type of players, but I figured if it was close, then maybe the tie goes to the rookie from a cost and how much the arrow is pointing up. What are the possibilities for Jared Kingston? I think they might be a little higher than for Spencer Burford, even if Kingston needs a bit more grooming at this point. Before the defensive line, let's go receivers. So 7 receivers on the active roster. That's because of Brandon Ayuk being in limbo. There are reports that his quote-unquote phantom back soreness, he's been cleared by a doctor, and that John Lynch expects him to practice on Thursday. Now, Still not sure what the hell the deal is with this contract. If the Niners are really drawing a line in the sand because they felt they lost the Bosa deal and they want to win this contract. The Steelers, if reports are true, weren't giving him $28 million. The Patriots, if reports are true, were going to give him 32, and maybe the Browns were somewhere in between, but he said no to the latter two teams, and there's no reason to go to Pittsburgh because that's turning into a borderline poverty franchise. They're going to be fighting for third place at best in their division. And Russell Wilson has been named the starter. Good luck. Good luck to everybody on the Steelers. I mean, it's unfortunate for me because I drafted George Pickens as my number 2 receiver. I had the number 1 pick in a 12-team draft, and that happened to be, I think, at least to me, best available when I took him. So Wilson, if you're going to look anywhere, look for George Pickens, but I don't expect much for that, for that Steeler offense this year unless things start clicking on all cylinders. If anyone's really in Ayuk's camp calculating the California state tax versus the Pennsylvania state tax, and that's why he thinks he should be getting $30 million. $30 million is the benchmark. I understand that. You have someone like Tyreek Hill making it, and you have someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown making it. Obviously, Tyreek Hill is much more worthy of that average annual value than Amon-Ra St. Brown, but let's not split hairs when it comes to the contract and what they think he is or isn't worth. He's definitely worth more than the 26 the Niners have offered. I still say they should settle around 28.5. But at some point, when are the Niners going to say, this is the contract? You either play on your 50. This is what we're offering. We're not moving off of that. Either you play on your 5th-year option at $14 million, or you sit out and you don't get paid at all. And we can revisit negotiations next year. Apparently that's something Diamador Lador wants to do. He wants to gamble on himself this year to get more than maybe what the 49ers would offer currently or what the market dictates. And the market is all sorts of off on cornerbacks as well, like what they're getting annually. But let's go back to receivers. 7 being kept. Curious number. I'm not a huge fan of Ronnie Bell, but Ayuk, Debo, Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing, Chris Conley, good for him to make it, and Ronnie Bell. If Brandon Ayuk is out week 1 or if he takes any sort of I'm going to sit hardline stance, Conley is going to be your starter. It's not going to be Juwan Jennings. 7 receivers for a team that will never dress more than 5 and will usually probably dress 4. Keeping someone like a Ronnie Bell could have been a curious move, but it didn't ultimately hurt them anywhere else on the roster, except for maybe D-line, and we'll get there momentarily. But I don't think there were really many surprises at receiver. Ronnie Bell, we knew was going to be gone. Trent Taylor, strong feeling that, he was going to be gone. And obviously they released some younger players, Tariq Owens, Tay Martin gone. Robbie Chosen, it's great that, like a player like Robbie Chosen wound up getting the time to kind of showcase his skills in training camp and the preseason. But I wonder if he knew in his heart of hearts, like he was never making the team. Like there are players across the league that get a late contract to training camp, but they have no chance of making the team. They're just a camp body. I wonder if they actually know that, or being, high-end athletes and ultimate competitors, that they really think they have a chance. I'm just curious, they get flown in there, they get to stay in the hotel, they get fed. I don't know if they get paid anything unless they get some sort of guaranteed, or a little bit of guaranteed money for the 3 weeks they're going to be with the team. But all the receivers that we thought were not going to make the team didn't. Ronnie Bell / Chris Conley / Trent Taylor, that was always where the discussion was happening. Danny Gray was never part of the discussion, at least anything that I'm discussing. And I think the right players were kept, and Ronnie Bell, at least right now, that extra spot at receiver is not hurting them. And he may be a player that might be the first to get let go once someone like a Kalia Davis or a John Feliciano comes back from IR, designated to return. So just keep that in mind. So let's go to the defensive line. There was an initial surprise when Sam Okeanu, if I pronounced that correctly, hopefully I did, was kept as the 9th defensive lineman on the initial 53 from Tuesday. Tweener, 6'1", 270. What is he exactly? He's an undersized D-end, even though he's got the weight. He's an undersized he's definitely an undersized and underweight D-tackle. He was eventually let go in a series of roster moves that were made, bringing back Ben Barch and Eric Sauber, along with one other player, which we're going to get to shortly. So 8 defensive linemen on the roster, light, but all 8 players that I projected. So defensive end, Nick Bosa, Leonard Floyd, Yetur Gross-Matos, and Robert Beal. 4 defensive tackles, Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins, Jordan Elliott, and Kevin Givens. I thought a 9th player, whether it was, one of the bigger defensive linemen that could have maybe played a swing D-end, D-tackle role like a Shackle Brown would have made it. But he did not make the 53, nor did he make the practice squad, and we're going to go into that. Hoping, regarding Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos, the knee injuries, Floyd was announced as day-to-day the day after the Raider final preseason game. Yetur Gross-Matos is week-to-week. They have 2 weeks left to get to week 1 against the Jets, plus it's a Monday night game. He should be okay, but there are defensive ends on the practice squad that they could call up if needed. The D-ends, even if healthy, I know a lot of people have been saying, well, they could use help at D-end. Guys, show me a team whose D-end number 4 is or should be a quality starter in this league. It's really impossible to do. Whereas the Niners have 4 defensive tackles, 3 of which are and have been quality starters in this league. Kevin Givens has always been in backup role. At the end, the Niners have 3 players that have been quality or more starters in this league in Bosa, Floyd, and Gross-Matos. That 4th player at either position is, I don't want to say a fringe player, but you can't expect to be stacking starters and certainly not Pro Bowlers. You're not building a Madden roster here, guys. And as much as we can manipulate, or teams can manipulate the salary cap, it still is a thing. And there are bodies on the practice squad, which I'll get to momentarily. Linebackers, 6. I feel that that's heavy. Again, I don't think they're going to keep all 6 linebackers active on game day. I think it's going to be 5. And if that's the case, you can keep a linebacker, your linebacker number 6, on the practice squad. Now, it's not Jalen Graham, because he got released and signed with the Washington Commanders practice squad. But the 6 linebackers, it's Warner, Devondre Campbell, Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, D. Winters, Curtis Robinson, and Tatum Bethune. And those last 2, good for those guys. Good for Curtis Robinson at a really strong camp. He was knocking on the door the past couple years after, coming into the league from Stanford. Was on the practice squad last year. Could have left San Francisco, had contract offers from other teams, wanted to stay with the Niners, learn from Warner and Greenlaw, wanted to see it through, and it paid off. Kudos to Robinson. For Tatum Bethune, leading the team in tackles throughout the preseason. No, he was said he was too small, he was too slow, a 7th-round pick, he might have been camp fodder. I always had him slated for the practice squad, but it's a situation, again, where a player that shows out, the 49ers couldn't risk waiving him, thinking that they could not get him back to the active roster. And we saw it, obviously, with Cody Schrader at running back, who, we're pulling for undrafted rookie free agent. The Shanahan family has had great success finding late round or undrafted running backs, and you thought that he might be the next one, but was claimed by the Rams. So 6 linebackers. Again, Tatum Bethune, though, or Curtis Robinson. Again, I would just say he's a watch-out play. These are watch-out players. These, again, are players that could be released when someone who's on the PUP list, cough, cough, Dre Greenlaw, or Givens, or Feliciano, when they're designated to return. Linebackers heavy, and wide receiver is heavy, and maybe even offensive line, even though it's 9 with Trent Williams, someone could potentially go there, but I would not necessarily bet on it. Cornerbacks. On Tuesday, all of us were saying, what does it take to get Ambry Thomas off of the goddamn roster? Someone who broke his forearm. I wasn't reveling in that, but I figured, okay, that a forearm break, that's the death knell. He's definitely not going to be on the roster now, but he was as of Tuesday, just as John Feliciano was. Apparently, from the information I've gathered, you can only designate 2 players to return from IR with initial cuts. You have a maximum of 8 that you can designate, but only 2 initially. And Kalia Davis represents 1, and I guess John Feliciano is going to represent the other. Ambry Thomas, I'm assuming, is on IR, done for the year. If he would have been released with that injury, there would have been some sort of injury settlement that may or may not have affected his cap number. But it was just curious that, what were we all thinking at that point? We're thinking, wait a second, do they think Ambry Thomas with a fractured forearm is better than players they released, like a healthy Samuel Womack or a healthy Rock Ya-Sin? Then I started thinking, what the hell could Ambry Thomas have on Kyle Shanahan or John Lynch blackmail-wise that he still kept, that they had this golden opportunity with the injury to say, all right, peace out, you're gone, unless there was some sort of significant financial implication being injured and being released. Ambry Thomas, I don't care what he's doing in practice. There are folks out there that are watching practices, that are detailing practices, that are basically saying Ambry Thomas is just as bad in practice as he is during games. How many times does a player need to be benched? I believe he was a 3rd-round pick also. Don't quote me on that. I would have to check it. But how many times does someone like Thomas have to be benched before you cut bait? Like, he's like the football equivalent of a cockroach. You just can't get rid of him. They fortunately have, I'm not celebrating it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not celebrating it. But man, like a cockroach or a cat with 9 lives, they just could not get rid of him. So the corners, as predicted here, Charvarius Ward, Diamondor Lenoir, Renardo Green, Isaac Yiadom, Darrell Luter, and Rock Ya-Sin, who was released but brought back once Ambry Thomas went on IR. Said it before. We'll say it again now that we have the quasi final 53, the deepest and best cornerback room Kyle and John have had. Still waiting to see who would be the starting 3. Is it going to be Ward, Lenoir, and Green, or Ward, Lenoir, and Yiadom? And when it is a starting 3, does Lenoir move inside to nickel, or does he stay outside? Samuel Womack was picked up by the Colts, so good on him. Happiest with, I think, the cornerback room, not because I got the projection right, but because I think these were the best 6 to keep. And the need in my mind here was to keep 6 and not 5, just seeing how, even Isaac Yiadom rolled an ankle in training camp and he didn't play in any preseason games, just getting back to practice. So happy with the secondary as a whole. Let's move to safeties. Talanoa Hufanga, Jair Brown, George Odom, and Malik Mustafa. So Hufanga, there was some question whether he'd be put on the PUP list. He is not, but it doesn't mean he's going to be ready for week 1 at the Jets. I don't think they're going to make that decision until a couple days before the Monday night opener. And they have insulated themselves on the practice squad. We're going to get to that in a minute. But another easy position to project. There was really no one else that was going to supplant any of these 4 unless there was an injury, a new injury, or a prolonged injury to Talanoa Hufanga that would prevent him from being on the field for at least the first 4 weeks of the season. And your specialists, Jake Moody, Mitch Wishnowsky, and Tabor Pepper. Okay, all good. Let's briefly go through the practice squad, and I'll conclude with some overall thoughts. So they kept a 4th quarterback, Tanner Mordecai. I thought he showed enough in his limited time in preseason games and reading about what I could in training camp that it was worth a stash on the practice squad. A developmental QB. Remember, the quarterbacks behind Brock are only signed for 1 year. if this could be a runway or launch pad to the active roster next year for Mordecai, good decision to keep him. On the offensive line, Isaac Alarcon, Sebastian Gutierrez, and Drake Nugent. So you have a couple players that could play guard or tackle, and Nugent, who's exclusively a center. And I know Drake Nugent was right up there with Cody Schrader for a lot of 49er fans as another installment of Training Camp Heroes concludes with the 53 and the practice squad. But good on Drake Nugent showing out well enough to make the practice squad. At tight end, so Braden Willis, who was released, brought back. So a potential fourth tight end option if needed, if someone gets hurt. But also, even though he needs to work on his blocking, a potential backup for Kyle Juszczyk if something should happen at the fullback position. And undrafted rookie Mason Pline makes it as well as your second tight end. Receiver, and a surprise, or at least a new addition. So Trent Taylor makes it. If anything gets weird with punt returns with Jacob Cowing, or if Ricky Pearsall goes back there, or whomever else could get a look, and it looks like it's going to be Jacob Cowing to start, at least you have a trusty veteran on the practice squad. Tay Martin, who had a nice preseason, and Terrence Marshall Jr., formerly of the Carolina Panthers, a second-round pick, was with the Panthers for 3 years, did not have any great season. I think his best year in terms of receptions was low to mid-20s. He's a 6'2", 200-pound receiver that at least looks the part of an outside receiver that just brings more to maybe the practice squad than obviously someone like a Tariq Owens or even a Danny Gray. Danny Gray was eligible. Because remember, there's 6 spots on the practice squad for players with up to 2 years of NFL experience. Gray was on the team for 2 years. They thought more of someone else, granted, who had 3 years of experience and someone that they had in their own program. Just goes to show how much of a miss Danny Gray was. Now, defensive line, 4 in total. So DNs, Alex Barrett, and Jonathan Garvin. D tackles, rookie free agent Evan Anderson, and T.Y. McGill. So I had 3 of these players making the practice squad. I had Jonathan Garvin making the active roster, but happy that he, that there's, I'm not going to be happy about specific players, but happy that there are 2 extra bodies at DN, 2 extra bodies at D tackle if needed, considering the Niners only went with 8 on the D line. You can expect all 8 of those players to be active on game days. Cornerback, since they went with 6, whether it was Ambry Thomas, and thank God it's not, now that it's Rock Ya-Sin, Chase Lucas, the sole cornerback on the practice squad. And at safety, rookie undrafted free agent Jalen Mahoney from Vanderbilt with cornerback, slot cornerback, and safety flexibility makes it, in addition to a signee in mid-training camp, Tracy Walker from the Lions last year, on the practice squad, and he may be elevated for at least week 1 until Talanoa Hufanga is cleared. So there's your 53 plus 16, your 69, players. I'm assuming the Niners are going to add a 17th on the practice squad, an international pathway player. They haven't yet, at least as of this recording. So you'll have your 70 total players. And as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to wait until the dust settled from the curious moves that the Niners did not make, cuts or injured reserve designations that the Niners did not make, because we knew it was coming. It was just a matter of who. I think I had some educated thoughts, or hopefully all my thoughts are educated, but some educated guesses that, Feliciano is going to be gone and it's going to be Barch. Thomas is going to be gone and it's going to be Rock Ya-Sin. And they had to do something at tight end. It was just a matter of, is it going to be Eric Saubert? Is it going to be Logan Thomas? And Logan Thomas wasn't even part of the practice squad. Like, figure this situation out. They sign Logan Thomas early in the offseason, gets a little bit banged up, doesn't play all that much or practice all that much, gets released mid to late training camp, gets brought back before the Raider game, doesn't play in the Raider game, at least I don't think, But you had to figure they brought him back for a reason. Okay, he's healthy now. All right, Logan Thomas is healthy. Now the Niners finally have that legitimate number 2 tight end option as a receiver because they brought him back. You know, they didn't want to risk keeping him on the active market, on the free agent market, and have another team sign him, right? Like, that was, at least for me, the train of thought. Like, all right, they got him now. Now they're going to keep him. And they don't. Now, that doesn't mean that someone like a Logan Thomas can't be brought back at some point, put on the practice squad at some point. But obviously, they're maxed out on the roster right now and the practice squad. So that's still probably the area of, I don't want to say concern, but area of curiosity, right? Behind Kittle, is there really going to be a legitimate number 2 tight end option that we can count on for more than 10 receptions this upcoming season? I know that's setting the bar low. I would love to see between 20 and 30. But can we at least get to 10? Is it going to be Sauber? Is it going to be Tonjes? I don't know if I feel better about these 3 than if Latu or Willis was there. But that is the position with the most curiosity for me, and the positions of most concern. The O-line, especially if Trent Williams really decides to dig in and hold out. And if Jalen Moore has to start, obviously that's a significant step down. But if the Jets don't have Hassan Reddick, the pass rush isn't nearly as formidable. But if that is the case with that Williams, then who's your swing tackle? In case there's an injury that game, who the hell's going to bump out to tackle that you feel comfortable with? No one on the current roster do I feel comfortable with being a swing tackle if Jalen Moore is your starting left tackle. And the D-line, just because of the number, I think they have their best 8 defensive linemen on the team. I just would have felt more comfortable with 9. I know it's an odd number. That's just what I was always projecting. 4 DNs, 4 D tackles, and maybe 1 person that could play both, like an Eric Armstead, but obviously not someone of that caliber. I'm feeling pretty good about the 53. You know, when all is said and done, this is still a top 3 roster in the NFL. And if we're going to really be down upon the fact that someone like an Eli Mitchell is hurt and done for the year, let's be confident in what we've seen from Jordan Mason his first 2 years, but specifically this training camp and this preseason. The defense, Nick Sorensen, how is he going to dial things up differently than what we saw under Steve Wilks? The linebacker play, how much of a drop-off will there be from Greenlaw to Campbell? And the cornerbacks. It's half of the cornerback room is new. You got Ward, Lenore, and Luter. And Luter was a rookie, really didn't play much in terms of actual cornerback. And you have Green, Yadam, and Rock Ya-Sin. Will we see a secondary be more aggressive? Will we see a secondary that challenges receivers more? And that goes for, that just doesn't go for cornerbacks. It goes for the line and the linebackers. And if you've been listening to the podcast, I might not have said it last week, there is enough talent on the defense. And I'm not saying that this is an 85 Bears defense or a 2000 Ravens or 2013 Seahawks. I'm not saying that. But there's just as much talent on this defense as there is on the Browns defense. And the Browns at times were an enforced their will downhill attacking defense. I've heard it a lot when Robert Saleh was here, when D'Amico Ryans was here, and I'm sure Steve Wilks was saying we're going to be aggressive. What defensive coordinator out there is going to say, oh, we're going to be passive. We're going to keep everything in front of us. We're going to let the game come to us and hope another team makes a mistake and wrap up and tackle on third. Everybody wants to say all gas and no brakes, and everybody wants to say we're going to be violent and we're going to play with anger and ferocity and this and that. It's one thing to say it, and it's another to see it. As a fan, like, we've all watched defenses throughout the years where you can tell, like, shit, that squad is nasty. When have we felt, since Kyle Shanahan has been here, the Niners have had a top 10-ish ranked defense for a while now, right? But they've gotten tired as the game's gone on. They've had an inability to close. They haven't been dominant from beginning to end. And I know that's hard for a lot of defenses, especially the way offense has evolved and spreading, teams out more, and maybe it's more running and more sideline to sideline chasing from D linemen and linebackers, etc. But when have you looked at a Niners defense and said, beyond the names, and said, like, throughout the course of a full game, like that they're nasty today? Maybe in 2019 with the D-line, because that D-line felt like, even though they might not have gotten, 55, 60 plus sacks, I think they were in the high 40s, the pressure was relentless. You felt that you saw the pocket collapse. Throwaways, interceptions, quarterbacks escaping the pocket. You have to go back 5 years. And that was just, if you want to say it was a special D-line, fine. But I keep saying it, and I want it to appear. And as much as we watch as fans, I know there's a lot of fans out there that break down tape that are very knowledgeable with schemes and can call out coverages. That's great. But I think for a lot of us, sometimes, or not sometimes, but I think for a lot of us, you can see when an offense is being dynamic. I think you could say that the Niners offense at times dictates things. And obviously they have a lot of skilled all-pro, Pro Bowl type players on offense, and Shanahan's scheme and all that the Niners offense maybe sometimes dictates coverage or dictates coverage rotations, what the defense is trying to do. All I'm asking, and I know it's a big ask, and who am I? I'm just someone with a podcast, that for the amount of talent and Pro Bowlers and all-pro players, I would love to sit down and watch multiple games this season where I'm saying out loud to a friend or my son, shit, man, the Niners look different this year. They look nasty. They're exerting their will. Like, that's, with this amount of talent, that's what this defense should be doing. And if it required a new defensive coordinator, 3 new cornerbacks, a new addition or 2 at the linebacker position, a new scheme, whatever, get back to stuffing the run, get back to rushing the passer, and get back to not giving up third downs as often as it felt like they were last year, and especially at times in the playoffs. So that's going to conclude the roster reaction podcast for today. Like always, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make us part of your listening routine. Next podcast could be this weekend if there's anything noteworthy, or early next week. I think we may have one just to talk about some Niner stuff. And then later on in the week will be the gear up, the preview for week 1, Monday night. Jets at 49ers. Who knows who's going to be on the field for both the Jets and the Niners, in the famous words of Kyle Shanahan. Who knows if any of us are going to be alive on Sunday, Monday, whatever the day was. But until we speak again, stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Take care.